writing tests and developing my code. So that, this comes back to what I said earlier, I want to reduce misunderstandings about the code and about the technology, and one of the ways to do that is with test-driven development. Having a strong suite of unit tests, following solid design principles, refactoring, cleaning up my code. So this is all test-driven development. So I said that for a couple reasons. One is encourage your developers to use this if they're not. And secondly, to draw a distinction between test-driven development and acceptance test-driven development. So I've talked about it up until this point. I've talked about acceptance test-driven development, where you get some examples and you just distill them down to the bare minimum, and possibly you automate them. Is not the same thing as test-driven development. Test-driven development is a really low-level, unit-tested, method-by-method, developer-centric programming time technique, whereas acceptance test-driven development, specification by example, is a before development, get everybody on the same page technique. Okay? So don't think that adding the A in front of TDD just means higher level test-driven development. It's not the same thing. So ATDD is a really, really, really bad, confusing, misleading name. Okay. So a little bit more on that. TDD guides the development and the design, but ATDD guides the requirements. It helps you create a living spec. TDD is a developer programming thing, something you do while programming, and ATDD is something that you do before development, before you start your sprint. When you're doing TDD and you're at the unit test level, as soon as you get it to pass and you check it in, you expect that unit test to always pass in the continuous integration server. If you automate an acceptance test, if you do an ATDD, that test may fail for most of your sprint. So you may check it in and it'll be in your continuous integration server running, and you expect it to fail until all the development is done to make that story pass. Okay, so there's a number of differences between these techniques. Also don't want you to confuse ATDD with user acceptance testing. User acceptance testing is something done at the end once you've developed many stories and you want to deliver it. It's kind of like the final sign-off. But ATDD, again, is done before development. It's to get everybody on the same page. This is also, what I'm talking about here is also not regression testing. Regression testing is what? Regression testing is making sure you haven't broken anything, and I put a little emphasis on anything, because if you're doing regression testing, you're most likely going to test everything. Most of the system, most everything, right. And that is most likely going to take a long time.
6
right?
Saturdays.
6 Saturdays, Claire says.
I gotta put that in my schedule.
Not kidding.
So,
measuring Q.
but coming back to this, if you make this specification executable, you want it to execute fast. You want people to run it. You want to make sure that most basic minimal specification still works after you've changed stuff. So ATDD, if automated, needs to be small, focused, and fast. Now, here's something that I've seen groups do and heard of groups doing that I want to recommend against. I don't recommend letting dev own this stuff. Don't let QA own this stuff. Okay? It needs to be owned by the product owner in the business. The business needs to have a sense of involvement and ownership and care about this specification. Because what typically happens, if you let dev go own it, what are they going to do? They're going to use the tool that makes it easiest for them, and it's not going to be a good communication tool. You're not going to be able to use this to avoid the misunderstanding, which is what I'm arguing is the most valuable aspect of it. Same with QA. What are they going to do? They're going to put it in QTP or whatever center.
Quality center.
Blasphemy.
Whatever it's, or they're going to, code it up in Selenium, and the business owner is not. They're going to look at it. I don't know. I can't read this stuff. What does it mean? And so you want these things to be readable, legible. So a table format or giving within works. You want it accessible to your product owner, your customer. You do definitely, though, want to get all roles involved in these things. Testers think differently than programmers, and they both think differently than the product owners, and that cognitive diversity is a good thing. That's how you find problems. Think about edge cases and what ifs. So you want everybody involved. And you don't want it to become just a QA thing or just a dev thing that nobody else can understand. You do want business to own and edit the specifications. I kind of already talked about that. And so these specifications need to be accessible outside of the developer's IDE and outside of the tester's IDE. Okay, I think I've already talked about that. It's not about testing, it's about communicating. And so now let me write up the last step here. So in keeping with the alliteration, we have a D for demo. What I really mean is explore. So yeah, after we develop a story, we usually do a demo. We get some feedback, and that sort of feeds this cycle. You think about the next thing you want to do to the system, or you think about some way that this story needs to be improved in another story. And we do often do a demo, but I'm really talking about some exploration, some additional testing. So suppose I did this. Maybe I came up with a minimal set of examples, and let's say I automated them. Is that all the testing I need to do?
Nope.
What else do I need to do, Claire?
Think about it a little bit.
What
Try
testing
something.
do I need to do? Smoke testing? What else?
How about the most common path the user would take?
Exploratory testing, maybe?
For this,
Now, coming back to smoke testing, could I use, if I automate these minimal specification, could that be my smoke test? Or does smoke test need to be a little different? Smoke test is usually a higher level?
I get test scalability.
So you may do some scalability testing in addition to this. So yeah, so maybe this works as a smoke test for you, maybe it doesn't. But there's scalability testing, performance, usability, all the abilities. There's load testing, regression testing, break the box testing.
Draw the box.
Come on, please, Alex, draw the box for us. Come on.
Get up here.
All right, I'll draw the box.
Everybody, Alex.
Yay! No marker
I know
for
the
you.
box, but I
Draw
can't
it
draw it
in
from
blue.
memory.
I think I can. All right. Standard 2x2 matrix. Anybody went to Harvard is required to come up with one. So what we've been talking about, ATDD lives up in here.
Hey Alex, can you switch markers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that better?
A little bit.
Yeah, that's all right.
Now can you incorporate green?
All right. So up here is business. This is technical. This is critiquing. And this is
Team.
team. Yeah, helping. All right, so down here in the technical side and helping the team type stuff, that's the stuff that users don't care about. So things like unit tests, that's primarily what we're talking about down here, but there's a lot of other technical type tests. BDD, we haven't really gotten into that, but maybe that's kind of ATDD, other, so like things like if you do standard tests, just what do you call it, functional testing, right? right? Things of that nature. That's you're looking at things from a business perspective, but you're also helping the team. That's what this is, right? Acceptance test driven development. You're making sure you're doing what the requirements say, right? What the spec said, right? Over here, you're getting into more of the critiquing the product. Let's see, like more of the what if. What isn't really covered by the spec? Is this really solving the problem that the user really wanted solved? So this is where you get into your exploratory, right? And you certainly can do some of that here, but most of the time it's not based on spec. It's based on what you're looking around, what you're discovering, what you're thinking about, right? And this is where your UAT would be if you have UAT. So it's business facing, and you're critiquing the product. Here's where you're trying to break things, right? Here you're trying to make things work. Here you're trying to break them. And down here is your ilities, right? That's your performance. I don't like to do that because when you do that, people think that you do this first, and you do this second, you do this third, and you do this fourth, which is bad, right? Because that's what we do in waterfall, right? If you even do this at all, you might do some of this. You usually have UAT at the very end, and oh yeah, we need to do performance testing, right? So yeah, that's your perf and your security.
So why do you put the numbers up there?
Because
So you can
Brian
refer to
did.
the quadrants.
Yeah, so when you say quadrant 4, you mean that. Yeah. But yeah, it's important to bring up that discussion that this is not temporal. These things are happening all the time throughout the life cycle of the problem, especially if you're doing agile, iterative development, right? You're doing things in quick succession, all parallel, all happening at the same time. So you always want to be thinking about performance. And like he said, a smoke test, right? That kind of term has gotten changed over the years. It used to be smoke test literally meant let's test it to make the machine smoke, right? That's a performance test. That's that kind of test, which is cool. You should totally do those types of things. Load tests, right? So a smoke test these days is, does it do the stuff that I just told it to do? That's kind of more of a unit type test. And your ATDT stuff would take the place of that kind of stuff. Now, you may want to fire up the product, actually look at it with a human, poke around, make sure, yep, it's live in production. Let's tell people about it. But yeah, and I'm sure you'll get to that.
Cool.
This is almost all automated. This is mostly automated. This is hardly at all automated. And this is all automated. Technology, all automated.
In fact, the first quadrant
What's that?
is almost absurd in terms of talking about manual unit testing.
A lot of developers still do it that way.
Yeah,
So-
that doesn't really make any sense. But, okay.
So yeah, so we need to spend time in each of the quadrants, and how much time you spend in each one may vary through the life of your project, but thank you for making clear that we got to cover all of these.
Yeah.
Brian Merrick is the guy who came up with this. He's one of the signees of the Agile Manifesto, right? Look him up. This was also popularized by Lisa Crispin, Janet Gregory in the book Agile Testing, which is required reading. So,
Okay.
right, thanks.
Yes, Claire.
I think it's worth saying that not everybody would be involved in every activity on
Yeah.
the testing quadrant.
Right. So different people are involved to different extents in each one of these quadrants. Okay. So back to this stuff. Back to the focus on this. Suppose you wanted to say, "Oh, I'm sold. Let's start doing this," and you go in and you say, "Hey, everybody, let's start doing acceptance test-driven development," and people's eyes glaze over. Well, let's think about the name that we use for a little.